It is fantastic to be here with you on Gadigal land. We are, of course, on stolen land. This land is, was, and always will be Aboriginal land. Sovereignty was never ceded. We're here tonight to have an incredibly interesting discussion, I'm predicting, to talk about AUKUS and what it really means for all of us, and to try and unpick this secretive deal that's costing us billions and billions of dollars. And we're beginning to see the physical manifestation of this deal. So whether it is where are we going to put a nuclear submarine base, or what's going to happen with Victoria Barracks, these are questions which are now bringing into sharp relief just what Australia has got ourselves into, signing up to AUKUS. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Abigail Boyd. I'm a Greens MP in the New South Wales Parliament. I have a bunch of portfolios, and one of them is industry and trade. And I've had the dubious pleasure of uncovering a bunch of documents recently in relation to whether or not New South Wales is going to put a nuclear submarine base at either Wollongong or Newcastle. It is, of course, an active consideration, and it's something that again brings into this stark relief that you can't just have a deal to produce weapons and take weapons from another country. You actually have a physical manifestation of that. And just like with AUKUS, where no one asked the public if they actually wanted it, nobody has asked us if we want a nuclear submarine base in New South Wales. We have two amazing speakers here with us tonight, and I would like to welcome our very special guest speaker, Dr. Albert Palazzo. Dr. Albert Palazzo is an adjunct professor in the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at UNSW Canberra. He is a member of the Australian Peace and Security Forum and the Australian Security Leaders Climate Group, and previously served as Director of War Studies for the Australian Army. He has written widely on military history, strategy, national security, and climate security, including his most recent publication, we're plugging it here, called The Big Fix, Rebuilding Australia's National Security. So you can have a look at that at the registration desk. But I now welcome Albert Palazzo.
Thank you, Abigail, and thank you for welcoming me here tonight. I'm a military historian, so talking about war is sort of what I do. And talking about risk is something that's inherent to talking about war. Tonight I'm going to be talking about risk. When I first read about Morrison's announcement of AUKUS, and I looked into what the little information that was available, I concluded that this was the stupidest defense agreement Australia had ever entered into. But since then, I've changed my mind, and now I believe it's the riskiest defense policy that we've ever entered into. And risky because, but Australia is one of the safest places in the world. There's no threat. There's nobody who's coming to get us. It's largely in the heads of our political masters who see these dangers out there that just simply don't exist. And so we're having a huge military buildup, probably on the order of $500 billion. And it's not clear. The government hasn't said, what are we protecting us from? The obvious answer is China. But as far as I'm aware, China isn't showing much interest in coming and getting Australia. And then this is because, when I used to work for the military, I came to understand how they do a risk assessment. And they do it by, first the politicians sort of hint at, this is the conclusion we want. And then the people doing the risk assessment would make it happen. And so what the government really wants most is to tighten the relationship with the United States. But I also think that there's an enormous distraction that the government is running. It's almost like a con. And the United States is also part of it. And it's because they keep making the issue the submarines, the nuclear-powered submarines, whether they're new or used or whether or not they show up at all, is not the issue. but it's what's happening alongside the subs, and that's the bases. And the government doesn't talk about the bases much. They talk about them as being, job opportunities. And we're going to, survive the Henderson precinct and the Osborne precinct. So it's all about the bases, not about the subs. I mean, the government doesn't tell us this because they don't want us to be thinking about the bases. So the Americans are gradually getting a number of very significant bits of territory, whether it's Tyndall up in Northern Territory. They've already used Amberley to launch an operational bombing mission. But the key ones are going to be the one that will eventually show up somewhere on the East Coast, presumably, Port Kembla. But the one that they're also building at Sterling. And this is what the United States really wants. And that's why, the submarines aren't terribly important in this deal. And whether they come or not, the Americans won't really care. It's because once they got the bases, it's going to be very difficult to get them out. Now, I met Ian earlier today, who's, wants to get them out of Pine Gap. And that's an admirable objective. I agree with that. But they're, dug in pretty deep, and Pine Gap is pretty important to them. And so will be, Sterling, once they're able to base their submarines there, because it gives them the opportunity to project power against the Chinese in the Indian Ocean, which is a lot harder to do if you're coming from Guam. So
Albert Sterling's just off Perth.
Fremantle. So Fremantle, it's the Western Coast base in Fremantle. So that's what it's all about. That's what AUKUS is about. And once these bases are operational, the risk to Australia is that now we are a mandatory target. Not only are we going to be involved in the war, but we're going to be a target in the war. And personally, I wouldn't want to live out in Sterling or Port Kembla or even Pine Gap, because one day the Chinese will do something about it or try to do something about it. So we've gone in this relationship with the United States to one where we're taking enormous risks. The government isn't telling us why we're doing this or even quantifying what the risks are. And we're just being expected to accept it. And, frankly, that pisses me off. And which is why I keep writing things like that and other things about why AUKUS is such a bad deal. Is that 10 minutes?
No, fine.
Okay.
We can get to Q&A earlier.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
You want to save it for questions? All right.
Okay.
Cool.
So can everyone? Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm going to invite David to speak now, and then after that we will have a Q&A. Just a reminder, the way that we thought it might work is if you use the app. But I think we can probably all hear each other, and we may be able to free flow it a bit.
Yeah.
So, Mr. David Shoebridge is a Greens senator, as you all know. He was elected in 2022. Before that, I had the pleasure of working with him in the state parliament. Mm-hmm. He is, of course, a barrister, and he is now the Greens spokesperson for foreign affairs, peace and nuclear disarmament, and a passionate campaigner against nuclear warfare. David is taking Greens on defence to a whole new level.
Yeah.
But I do want to start by acknowledging we're on Gadigal land, right? We all know it's Gadigal land. And we're talking about AUKUS, and one of the big fights about AUKUS is stopping nuclear waste being placed in storage facilities on First Nations land. Doesn't matter where in this continent they're going to put the waste, it's going to be on First Nations land. And I got to tell you, across this country, for decades and decades and decades, often without any help, First Nations people have been fighting to protect their country from nuclear waste dumps. And they've won it in Muckaty, they've won it across the country, and if there's no other reason to stand against AUKUS, it's to stand with First Nations peoples to protect their land and water from nuclear waste. And let's not forget. But, like Albert sort of set the scene, hasn't he? If you wanted to defend Australia, let's say you wanted to build a submarine, right? You want to get a submarine for Australia, and you will look at the entire world. You say, I've got the whole world to play with. Where do I go for a submarine? I tell you where you wouldn't go. You would not go right on the other side of the planet to the UK, who currently their nuclear submarine industry is in a complete meltdown. No pun intended, right? They have 5 of these attack class submarines. Guess how many were in the water this week, ready to go?
One.
No, it's naught. It's naught. It's naught because they can't get them. They have a nuclear reactor program that they've got that is meant to be building the reactor for the AUKUS submarines, right? And I've got this bloke called Jonathan Mead, who's the Admiral of the Australian Submarine Agency. You know, Admiral Mead. Very, very serious man. He doesn't accept many of my propositions when I put them to him, right? I often say things like, why didn't you have a refund on the deal? And he goes, no, don't need a refund. It's all on track. I say to him, when are we going to get the sub? It's committed. But one thing Admiral Mead does agree on, and we see eye to eye on this, is if you want a nuclear submarine, you need a nuclear reactor, right? It's got to be a key part of the submarine. And the UK core production facility, which is what's making the reactor for the AUKUS submarine, for the 5th year in a row now, has been said by the equivalent UK Audit Office to be a program that is unachievable, unremedial, will not produce a nuclear reactor, and needs to be radically revisited. 5 years in a row. That is a project that's been run by a small, struggling company called Rolls-Royce, right? Rolls-Royce are running this 5 years in a row. The audit officer said, does not work, will not produce a reactor. And we collectively, the Australian taxpayers, thanks to Anthony Albanese and his mates, have given them and have promised to keep topping up $4 billion Australian dollars for that program. $4 billion. $4 billion to build a reactor that the UK's own audit office says will not happen, will not work, and won't appear.
What is that a second?
How is this happening? We could go to the US, right, and their Virginia-class submarines. In order to have any spare to give us a couple of renovated second-hand clunkers in the early 2030s, they need to be knocking out 2.3 new ones of these a year, right? And they've needed to be doing that since 2023, churning them out at 2.3 a year. That means by the early 2030s, they'll have enough for the US and whatever, wars they want to be doing, and a few spare to give to Australia. 2.33. They have been knocking them out at the rate of 1.3 or 1.2, or the most recent figures, 1.1 a year. That's what, and this year they've only budgeted to produce one because they realise what's the point of budgeting to produce any more. And we have given those same facilities in the US, 2 shipyards, we are giving them, guess how much money? Did you say $4 billion? Yes, you're right, $4 billion. $4 billion. Every time Richard Marles goes over, he's got to bring a suitcase of rubies to give to the US to feed into their industrial capacity to produce nuclear submarines that are not appearing. Now, I'm not a hawk, right? I'm a Green senator. I'm not much into nuclear submarines. I don't think they're good. I think they're bad. They produce nuclear waste. They engage in horrible warfare. I'll talk to you why we don't need nuclear submarines in a sec. But even if I wanted nuclear submarines, who the hell would be doing this? Who the hell would be doing this? Like, if you wanted to pick the 2 places on the planet that are unable to get us a nuclear submarine project, you'd sign on to AUKUS. That's what it is. So I think Albert then starts unpicking, well, hang on, nobody would be doing this for nuclear submarines. That's nuts, right? So what is this all about? Well, I agree with Albert. It's about the US getting 2 nuclear submarine bases in Australia.
Yeah.
One just off Perth and one in Port Kembla, just to the south of Sydney here. And the reason they want them is because it's kind of like getting some free submarines from the US perspective. Because instead of their submarines having to schlep all the way from San Diego to China, they can just take a shortcut up from Perth and they can scoot back up from Perth, and it's like getting free submarines. They're ready to deploy. They can go into deep water. It's a gimme and a bonus. Well, which is nice because the Albanese government has committed $8 billion of our taxpayers' money to build them that base in Stirling. They've already dropped 2.6 or so billion. They're going to drop the rest of it. They want it up and running by 2027. We're not going to have a nuclear submarine in 2027. We are literally building the US a nuclear base for them, a nuclear submarine base just off Perth. And then we've had a bit of a stoush, Labor Party and us, about public housing. You may have seen that or not seen that. We think there should be more money spent on public housing. And to their credit, though, the Albanese government have put in a public housing bill, and they had it rammed through with the support of One Nation and the Coalition in this parliament. The problem is their only public housing bill that they've done is to build public housing for US and UK troops and their defence contractors over in Perth associated with AUKUS, and they're spending about $200 million on that. And they just dropped another $200 million in the budget, unrelated to the $8 billion, for 2 years of AFP police protection for that same facility over off Perth. $200 million for 2 years of AFP police. And when I questioned the AFP, I said, well, you know, what's your job? Are you looking after the whole base? Because there'll still be some Australians there. And we'll have a couple of maybe renovated, maybe not Collins-class submarines coming and going. I said, are you looking after the Australians with the 200 million? And they said, oh, geez, you couldn't do that for 200 million. No, we're just looking after the US and the UK and their submarines. Like everywhere you look, right? But the US gets their base, and that's what they've wanted. They want their base, and to their eternal shame, the Albanese Labor government are building it for it. And thanks to Abigail for doing the work in the New South Wales Parliament, because Abigail's used this lovely little power in the New South Wales Parliament that Chris Minns does not like. And pretty much anything that Chris Minns doesn't like is a pretty bloody good idea. But Abigail's used this power to force the release of a previously secret business case that the New South Wales government did about how great it would be to build a nuclear submarine base for the US off Port Kembla, right? And I'd urge you to have a look, follow Abigail's socials. We've done some work on this. The ABC's done some work on this. And what basically the New South Wales government says is, oh, that'd be great. It'll produce some economic activity down in Port Kembla. You maybe won't be able to do anything else with the port, like no green steel, no offshore wind, no other industrial base. But one of the really good things from the New South Wales government point of view is if you build a nuclear submarine base, then it's a little bit cheaper for the government to build infrastructure and to acquire land. And do you know why? It's because according to their consultants, and thank God for consultants, huh? Thank God for consultants. According to their consultants, people don't like living near a nuclear submarine, you know? Apparently they've got an issue with these floating nuclear reactors, each of which contain 300 kilograms of high-grade fissile uranium, bomb-quality uranium. They don't like living near those, flopping around out in the harbour just out from them, and they're a little bit troubled by living in a port and a city that is a nuclear target. But the good news is it'll reduce property prices and make it cheaper to acquire the land for infrastructure. So well done, New South Wales government, huh? How do you make this stuff up? Our public money paid to produce that report to try and justify building the US a nuclear submarine base that puts a target not just on Port Kembla, can I tell you that? Because if Port Kembla takes, you know, a nuclear strike, we better hope there's not a southerly blowing, huh? Because it's literally putting a target on the single largest population gathering in the entire continent. And for what? Do you know what it's about? This whole thing isn't about nuclear submarines. It's not about making Australia safe. The only reason we would have nuclear submarines is to deploy them off the coast of China, to trail and follow Chinese nuclear submarines as a little bit of a US deployment, and therefore be able to do a counter-strike in the event of a major conflict between the US and China. That's what we're doing. We are literally spending this money, building the bases, compromising our defense to invite ourselves to the next US war, this time with China. And what the US loves about this is they've managed to move the front line and ensure, because most of their islands in the Western Pacific is where they've traditionally wanted to project power against China. You know, think of Okinawa South down to the Philippines. Most of them are at incredible risk in the first 24 hours of a serious conflict with China. So what's the US's response? Well, we're going to move the front line down into Australia. We're going to have our nuclear submarine bases off Perth and off Port Kembla. We're going to put nuclear-capable B-52 bombers at HMAS Tyndall, which is just south of Darwin. We're going to pre-position Marines and military equipment in Darwin and be ready for a strike. And they're going to be permanently housing a whole bunch of their defense material in Townsville now. We are putting ourselves on the front line of a war between the United States and China, and that's where the US wants to fight it. They don't want to fight it in San Diego. They don't want to fight it in mainland US. They want to fight it on mainland Australia. And our political leaders are inviting us into that knife fight. I reckon about this. I reckon we cancel AUKUS. I reckon we uproot Pine Gap, you know?
Yes!
Pull up the mushrooms by the roots. We uproot Pine Gap. We don't build the nuclear submarine bases, and we actually make Australian defence and foreign policy to represent our interests, to defend Australia, not join someone else's fight. And that's great. There's a strategy that we can do. It's called the echidna strategy, right? We all know echidnas. Like if you're Greens and you don't know echidnas, out. Echidnas are cute little critters, right? I love them. And if you go bushwalking, you'll sometimes see an echidna. And if you go with your kids, they'll chase the echidnas, and the echidna will just zook into the ground, and you just get this little spiky little dome. And you know what? You can't have a go at an echidna because it's real spiky and defended. But I don't feel threatened by echidnas either, right? I've never been chased by an echidna, but I'm not going to mess with an echidna. That's what our defence force should be. It should be about defending Australia, defending our continental and our maritime and air approaches, and being a spiked little echidna with defence material that we control, with defence material that's not subject to a veto from Washington or Israel or the UK. And we say to our neighbours, we're no longer going to be investing with the US to project force against you and threaten you. We're not here to threaten you. We're not here to project force in the South China Sea. We're not here to do that. But we are here to defend ourselves. And we would urge you to structure your defence force in the same way. Make yourselves little spiky echidnas. So everybody's got a defence base. And it would be a downward spiral in arms production in the region. It would be a move towards safety and disarmament in the region. And we can start it here in Australia. And we need to start it here in Australia. That's why we need to cancel AUKUS. That's why we're here tonight. Thanks very much.
So first question is, do we actually need any submarine capability? Did we make a mistake in cancelling the subs from the French?
Is David Spears here?
He sent you the question.
Okay, you go first.
Well, I would say, in my opinion, and my analysis in this book, is that we don't need submarines anymore because technology has moved on.
Yeah.
We're investing in buying submarines, which is a symmetrical platform, which the Chinese also have in large numbers. And we're planning for a war where we're going to be fighting symmetrically with a great power, which means you can only lose. All right, so what we need to be thinking of is asymmetric. And this is what Iran is doing against the United States and what Ukraine is doing against Russia.
Yeah.
So we don't need submarines, but we need to be able to project power over our maritime approaches. And that's, land-based missiles and drones, air-based ones, and uncrewed submersibles, and uncrewed, I would say, even uncrewed surface warships. The Navy needs to get out of the crewed business. And they need to think about just uncrewed, because all we need to do is protect our maritime approaches. We don't need to be a project power worldwide.
Yeah. And I suppose one of the most remarkable things is when you read the most recent National Defence Strategy, they say, well, Australia's an island and we engage in maritime trade. And we engage in maritime trade all over the planet. We do it, some of it in North Asia, some of it in North America, Middle East and Europe. And therefore they say, well, because we engage in trade across the world, we need to protect our trade routes across the entire planet. And we need to be able to project force at any point across the planet to protect our trade routes. Now that is the most insane proposal you could imagine. A country the size of Australia, because we trade with the world, needs to be able to project, unbeatable military force at any point in the world to keep our trade links open. Like no one who was, seriously thinking about what the project for Australia should be would come up with that unless you wanted to justify us joining the US and being a big part in the US military and being a big part in the global military, because that is actually the only military currently able to do that task. And therefore, when you say, well, that's our job, that is our job to project force globally across the planet, their answer happens to be their neat a priori solution, which is we go to bed with Washington, we don't have our own defence force, they're a little bit part of the US military, and that's how we go about doing it. Like, that whole thing is just a crazy self-justifying argument for AUKUS and our subservient relationship with the United States. If instead we were doing Albert's solution, which is like defend our patch, and we happen to live in one of the most geopolitically benign parts of the planet. Last time I checked, there was a ruddy big Indian Ocean on one side, ruddy big Pacific Ocean on the other, the Southern Ocean to the south. Heard Island, of course, is a threat. And then this huge archipelago and thousands of kilometres between us and the Eurasian landmass. Like, we are spending an enormous amount of money to overcome all of our natural advantages, to go to war with people in distant parts of the world, when we should actually be building our defence force, like that Echidna strategy, around those natural defences. And that
Next question from the app. So I'm doing as I'm told. David, what's the connection to Victoria Barracks?
Oh yeah, thank you. And I feel quite guilty for not. Nikki, one of our former Greens councillors on Malara, was browsing on me earlier for not raising the link. We all know Victoria Barracks. Does everybody know where it is? Yep. And so the Victoria Barracks is actually, I think, Australia's longest and oldest military site anywhere on the country. And that's good and bad from a Greens perspective. But the Albanese government has got two people who went around and did a Cook's tour of all these military sites. They didn't spend more than a day in any place, and they came up with 67 of them that they wanted to sell. And they want to sell 67 sites in order to fund and provide the funds to pay for a nuclear submarine, right? And so literally what they're proposing now is they sell off Victoria Barracks. They try and find a private property developer who will pay something for it. And then the tiny little bit of money from a defence perspective that we get from that, it's not going to go into Medicare or housing or even into a useful project. It'll just get sunk into AUKUS, the AUKUS submarine project. Flogging off green open space, public land to private developers with all of the heritage in order to put money into this money pit of AUKUS. Like, I mean, I went and visited Victoria Barracks with a parliamentary committee the other day too. And we went on and we spoke. There's a whole bunch of actual military activities that happen there. One of the big headquarters parts of the Australian military that sort of coordinates all the other parts. It's got significant ongoing use. And I was saying to them, well, what's the plan? When you sell Victoria Barracks, where are you going to go? They said, we don't know, we haven't been told. I said, well, do you know what the plan is for not just your unit, but any of the units moving? And as we go around the country, there's no plan for this defence sell-off, other than one big plan, which is flog it off and put it in a bucket and pay for AUKUS. And I think we should resist it for that reason.
Absolutely.